is okay.
Good.
Told me it's fine to have. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to see all you know, old faces. I walked this morning until the very avenue. I just, oh my God, some busy.
I know, it's okay. Oh, you know, I've just been doing that crime.
So you're either gonna feel that PTSD.
Yeah, that term is clearly like something very good.
Yeah. Carbon's getting good on fire.
Oh, yeah. I'm a guy, so you said they did a very good job. And we just, you know, review the last year's models and the staff by staff. You have,
I'll send them an answer. That's not a problem.
Good.
I think it's great. I think she can do it, so.
Good. She will be good.
Yeah. She like it, she like it, have a question, but she like it. She always compare, and this is so.
Started you see the camera.
Looking forward to this.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. And you have to stay all day in the.
That's all right. My wife, so she can handle everything at home.
Just like once, just like several questions, but all at
Oh,
once.
things.
Yeah, it's like one day.
Well.
Well, I try to do the questions that are on the shared drive within that one day.
Right, so they're all.
Right. Yeah, I was on the weekend.
Sometimes it's like if you-
Abel decided he wanted to,
Come back?
no. No, but we take him back in a
Trying
heartbeat.
to remember, like, that was through my email.
Where did John go?
Impression of an attorney through the statute.
John is teaching faculty at KU. Took a job.
How are you?
I'm
doing well, thank you.
How's it going?
criminal justice,
Oh, Jessica.
classes.
How are you doing?
So.
Oh my God, you too. Welcome back.
Just trying to get, we've got everybody.
One brother called me, so, oh, that's
So we should, they should have everything ready for us by then.
Yeah, we know
Then
everybody.
it's a matter of
You're done that.
rolling it out to.
Yeah.
stakeholders.
Right, and we are ready, they can actually.
So once I, yeah, because we haven't seen like.
But the temperature here.
So I can't, like, I can't, like, spend it just. We need their help.
Yeah.
But until I know, like, when I'm witnessing, like, asking for help, with all the time, it's like, I'm not gonna bother them. If they're like, sometime in the future, I'm gonna need your help with this
Right.
thing that I can't tell you anymore about.
This model.
So it's been like
So
busy with.
what it
like,
looks like.
various holding back.
So next time.
Yeah.
After the consensus group, the meeting.
Yeah.
That's
See,
Right.
and
So that's gonna be,
the numbers come.
getting all of that done is gonna, and like implemented is gonna be a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think once we know that.
That's a.
Sounds like it.
To talk about.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like we figured out, the good thing is we don't have to set everybody else's login.
Oh, that's
Like I should just be able to email form, it's like a protected email.
Yeah.
I think we'll link it opens in like a secure window.
See, this one.
Thank you.
We still have a lot of people are sending paper forms back and forth, they're like printing out, finding, scanning, sending back, it's like.
Yeah. So that means.
Yeah.
I'll look for it now. That's your summer, Jessica.
Yeah, the two.
Yeah.
No, well, I was out for the first 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So then-
Scary.
So,
But the first year.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
we always do, they go way too fast. How about your kids?
Yes, it's good.
They're all in camps,
But.
I'm anxious to kind of see what's.
This summer, it was like a week of.
We build this model, let's say check. Last year model. There's something we can test.
My husband likes to eat hot
Yeah.
dogs. And
Back at it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Suddenly I think, oh my God, 5 years I didn't work, but now it's I work.
Is it like getting back on the bike? Is it that easy for you? It is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Anyhow, it feels, you have something.
Uh-huh.
Cause I'll be like,
That's important.
Yeah.
Gotta stay engaged, bro. Gotta stay engaged.
it's like pretty much all day.
It's 96.
96 years old.
But she's, you know,
It is, yeah, I see, how it's working now, so.
you
It's
know,
like a minute.
Who else? So we're gonna say too.
Uh-huh.
she got a heat up on him, so.
Should be insurance.
And you have.
Safety is.
So, well, it's working now.
It's working, right? They can join,
Yeah, he basically.
Okay.
whether they can hear you or.
This is.
It's asking whether they can hear you or.
Yeah.
Each.
Everyone's been missing this.
Yeah,
They can see us, but just let them, whether they can hear us or not.
Okay.
So, yeah, I know it's a share.
You know, lots of.
Can you ask them if they can hear us?
I'm gonna tell you what I admire.
Yeah.
That's very
I know
cool.
they do a lot of.
China is,
Is he muted?
the children take care of.
Stay home.
Carl, can you hear us?
I can. Thanks, Scott.
We can hear
Great,
you.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
If you need anything.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
No.
Are you in Austin?
We
Yes.
did.
You're back?
I have 6 or 7.
No traveling this week?
Your-
No.
Got it.
Oh, that's good, that's good.
Good.
Hard work.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's a rarity. And they just spread it, so you know, so, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Bell, I'm running down to social security to see if I have my phone.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm assuming because they got her line.
That was my girl.
Chris, who sit by you?
I have Secretary Zamuda. You need a seat?
No, I was just curious who else was coming. Thank you. And I couldn't read it because it's facing this way. I just had you read to me.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm on the front table here, Judge. This is, I don't know.
Just look.
It's a little nerve wracking.
Specifically.
With the two Jessicas together.
I can't think better people.
Right.
Yeah. He's not lift. Oh, you figured it out.
Do this one.
One.
This is a nice building.
There we go.
Yeah.
Boy, this place used to be the biggest piece of crap. I was amazed.
Bed bugs and all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You walk in there and just don't breathe too deep, get it as good as you can.
That used to be
Office-
everything.
Yeah. Lots of cubicles.
You want.
Go there.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a table open.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
Or if you want to be
knocking.
next to the car, then I can go next to the car and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is nice.
Okay. Oh, maybe I can go there too.
I can swap either way. Most of the offices that are now in Furnace.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
You've been traveling a lot.
Hey, and congratulations in person.
thank you, thank you.
Back to 40 months, yes.
I heard that, heard back from
So
Jeff.
do you guys live, where do you live right
I told him, I said, no, I'm just gonna use my
Yeah,
car.
it's,
And he goes, I got to be faster.
that's fine with me.
Yeah.
Oh, nice, okay.
I don't, it's like, why make life even more difficult? So,
Long drive.
you know.
Flies,
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know?
What was that?
Yeah.
Turkey, I take, but I'll take whatever
No, you're
is
fine.
convenient.
Hey, Representative, how you doing, sir? See everyone. Hey. See you.
You are most welcome.
I would say just go and eat, right? Yeah, yeah.
And the rest of.
I was just remember going to the right. Gotcha.
Ah.
Yeah, there's one issue that we think needs to be figured out. That's easy.
Well.
And I also, he was really not having. I had to get upset, but I mean.
Bob, you come down this morning? No, I came in.
They were easy.
I'm back.
Did you get any? Instance, a lot of like.
It took 2 days. I didn't do it all. That's probably good. Where'd you get
I
it?
think I missed it. You never know.
In Breckenridge. Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kristen.
I know, no, I think it went well.
You have.
And there's always like a.
You figure it out, it's pretty quick. Did it take?
I will, but. The stuff, we were going back to more function.
I told him she was fine, but.
No,
I noticed
no,
yesterday,
you're right.
drinking water and.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's when I get a conference there, it's like, you know.
Just funny stuff like that, you know.
Swim.
Maybe we should one.
And, are you? When I go out there, it's like,
It's
I
like.
did the distance
But.
that I do in the city, and I get worse.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah,
It's great, so, and like, he's like,
It is going well.
that's probably who.
A lot of stuff that was
said that, yeah. But everything we do is. So this, and like, we have to do stuff. Yeah, yeah, I know. I had sent the, when I asked you, I sent the link. We were doing great. Yeah, one of them, but it was going to
Yeah, I bet
court.
Steve.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, good idea." And then sure enough,
And they're
last
not-
week,
Is that right?
I'll tell you what, he fell into it.
judges like, they're like, I
Yes.
can't send him
Was
to
involved
double, more than double.
corporation that just started down there.
I'm like, well, I'm going to. It's-
Putting live bacteria on the
We did.
ground. Very common.
I'm like,
Steve
there's
is
only so
hard.
much you can do. with that. You do so much.
Steve went to go for that group. And Steve-
Something to
Just
do
over and over
with
again.
That's what I was saying. I never saw these.
I can't.
God opened up.
Yeah.
They spend so much on he just eats so much, he's allergic to dairy, and so.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I never.
Oh, I call them the grizzlies.
You got your family though.
There's no place.
Thank
You know,
you.
they went over. That's how old are they? I really don't know. I
15 and
think they just
16.
went back now, so it's a little bit here.
No,
Are you doing camps or anything?
no, well, the oldest is
Yeah, we
a
grew up.
varsity cheerleader. She'll do cheer camp and then she's doing the yearbook camp for school, some yearbook team. And then the youngest, is doing her youth group summer trip. But other than that, I'm fall, and they're actually out playing ball today. I'm able to drive and do all of them. They both have jobs, so I'm busy and.
Good.
Making some gas money. So,
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah. What's going on? The youngest technically is just permitted to work and service. But, she can't get hours on her own, she gets assistance.
They travel, well, that's good. They get along well enough that from.
They serve there for.
The older.
The youngest.
Trees.
Technically drive the golf cart. Yep, she was her sister with her, so the her sister could drive her around, so she didn't have to push her clubs.
That's nice. I read about it. After that.
When it suits their benefits, they make it work. That's good.
You know, we used to,
We went to Hawaii
oh,
for our
but honey,
20th anniversary,
every year.
beginning of the month, and
Mhm.
Two of them stay home
When I first went out.
alone.
They
survived. They didn't from each other.
That's good. They're better
The
than.
house was all in one place. I don't know how much they actually ate.
And you know, we probably got that. In a good 10
I
years.
think McDonald's and Sonic benefited from our.
In his own way.
I don't know how much they got either, but.
It's just,
It's all good.
We go over and eat at a Mexican restaurant. Oh, yeah, where you guys break. Let's change his name.
We did
solid sandwich.
5 days in a, no, 5 days in Maui. And like 4 days in Oahu. And then a 20-day of travel. So we were gone from the 30th.
Hello.
You been?
How are you? See, Judge, how are you?
When the Mountie fires. So we were definitely. After a lot of years.
Everybody
Got to Oahu, it was like.
It was good. It's over. It was so much fun, but so I feel bad complaining about it so much, but like, it was so fun. But, no, it was the planning was not fun, but other than
Water usage, but here's.
that, it was all worth it. Dawson planned like really bad for complaining a lot because he planned like 4 surprises throughout the day. That's, and he picked me up in like a
Water consumption by 80 makes it.
like 1950s like Corvette. He picked me up that morning to do this. I'm sleeping now. Like, no, it was really cool.
Yeah.
So I feel bad for like.
I'm explaining.
Ryan's sense of community, it's probably a little bit like surprising.
No, you.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So. Target treatment. It's good to see you.
People ended up.
And I said.
I can't do anything about that. I don't think whether it's sitting as it.
I mean, we got it down, we had 50 in back.
It was pretty tame down compared to.
I remember.
So did you like?
They're different vibes. Yes, we love.
And then it was like.
Absolutely would go back to Maui.
I'd go back to Maui.
Oh my gosh.
Not that close.
Right on the west side, right north of where the fires.
I was doing that with my mom and my dad.
Every.
They own restaurants, they own a restaurant. Like, they're regulars of ours. They don't do everything.
Love the vibe.
They're not invited, sorry. No,
Yeah.
no, but it was fun.
Right.
But we also did.
Well worth it.
Good, good.
It's completely different vibe and we probably will not.
Very, very metropolitan. I rented a car there one time and walked up because the car dealer, the car rental, in University of Hawaii. It was not only half 2 miles away, so I walked. And I walk up there and the guy was, did you walk up? I go, yeah. Did you walk through that park down there? Didn't you feel like? People die down there and every night. Hey, you're the book is not full.
Thank you. Island, we got out of the city every day. And I tell people like we stayed on Waikiki Beach at the. We never got in. Yeah, we drove to the North Shore. We loved it. Loved the North Shore. Then over to the east side of the island. We did a couple waterfalls and we did a lot of things away from Waikiki. It's just so busy. One day we spent there, we spent surf watching and shopping. But we had to have Kauai, and that was on my list. And then my husband wants to go to the Big Island to see a volcano, which was active. You were there.
Yeah, I like.
So when we go back, we'll hit those other things. But with 10 days, we want to spend all whole time.
I didn't know. Yeah.
From Maui to Oahu, like literally we went up and then we went down, like 45 minutes.
We
Like,
fly
wow.
back today, the trust.
No.
So, I definitely want to. Get a couple.
Like I said,
Oh.
it's crazy. I just speak of that. It's funny, so it's feeling.
I went to. It was something there, but.
We're good. That's how I did that yesterday. Like.
Well,
All my stuff.
combination of.
Yeah. And things be like, okay, and I drove back to Lake with the president. Like you're. Oh, just like. No, I was. I got asked several times, like.
Aggressive.
The one who lived there for it.
The butt was. Over there.
It's on.
Yeah.
Water.
It's an indoor, yeah, it's an indoor.
Yes. So
Play.
15-year-old is currently at home alone trying to deal with
Feels like that.
a lot.
You mean a cold shower? Like, did it roof or did it just go?
Yes. It
Leaks.
In that last one, like some, I mean, with the group. It's just me, my three sons and I. And we are going to be on Kodiak Island and we are going to be, fishing for salmon and steelhead.
like that was just Hawaii. We left our 15 and 16-year-old home alone. The last day was the day the storm came through.
Place and looking.
So we're getting ready to fly out of Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Out of home.
Yeah.
On the phone. It was like 2 o'clock. In the morning. You're like, you and how I start the generator, the power. And I'm like,
Yeah, I mean-
trying to like, go to sleep. It is back on. You're not gonna be opening it, and like, the fridge will be fine.
It won't get too many.
Yeah, when we land in LA,
Either four of us. As they get
I'll call you,
their-
like,
Yeah. Get to a certain.
we landed in LA, we have great neighbors, why the only reason we could do it. And my neighbor's husband had come down for the generator, my neighbor had, you know, checked in on them the night before me, for me, found it, like all the things, so. It worked out, but it was like, the things they've had to deal with. Okay, well, then see how you start the generator. What you do with the floor goes up, this is what. You don't plan for those, yeah. What a good life lessons. Now, yes. Like, that's, you made her do it all. She pulled it out, and she put it out there, and put it in the freezer, and she can do it. Even your 15-year-old might feel. Except for all the 18-year-old has to be present. Oh, you guys work 3 hours a day. Don't give me anything. That was the other thing, our neighbor. Mowed for it. Had a cake. Oh, I had to call cop. And I'm like, they're like, well, we can come out and replace it. I'm like, do you need an 18-year-old president? Yeah, I'm like, yeah. Okay. Neighbor. Please go.
My oldest is 18, so we thought we'd be fine, but then she had to go to work.
Work.
11. You guys told us 8. And.
Yeah.
Yeah. Respect.
They dropped out there, you know, they gave us a little. I'm very envious that they got to move here and we're still over. Yeah.
Guys, I want you to keep eating. I know we're kind of gonna kill 2 birds with 1 stone. This is the steering committee for the comprehensive review of the Kansas pins and guidelines. And it's one of those times like you're on a roller coaster, and I hate roller coasters because that double duality of excitement and fear. And that's kind of what I'm feeling here today. 'Cause we're getting ready to roll off, and if you've taken a look at the schedule, it's an aggressive schedule. So, but it's been 33 years. First, get the important stuff out of the way. Brenda, thank you for everything. Much greatly appreciated. Get that out of the way. Kunlun, awesome to see you. I see a lot of, obviously, all familiar faces around the table, but particularly happy to see your face around the table, sir. And I always tease him when you walk in the room and he's there. He's the smartest man in the room. With that being said, we want to get started and jump right in. Do we need to do introductions? Let's just go around the table. I'll start. I'm Ben Sexton, the Chief Judge in the 8th Judicial District, Chairman.
Scott Schultz, I'm the Executive Director, and for Carl and Ellen, I think this will be helpful, so you can kind of get a pretty good flavor for who the people are you're dealing with anyway. But Scott Schultz, Executive Director, this will be 15 years in October.
Jessica Domi, Deputy Attorney General for the Kansas Attorney General's Office. I'm a criminal prosecutor, and I've been on the commission, I think, 10 years now.
Sounds about right.
I'm Jessica Glendenning. I'm the Chief Public Defender in the 7th Judicial District, which is Douglas County, Lawrence.
Frances Gibbons, the Special Projects Manager at the Sentencing Commission.
For the time, I'm retired. 5 years. And I'm gonna have to come back to see a lot of you.
Yeah.
Carmen Diaz, I'm the Director of Research at the Sentencing Commission. Quinlan is here today because he is kindly training me on how to do the prison predictions. Peyton Fenwick, I'm the Senior Research Analyst at the Kansas Commission.
Chris Line, Staff Attorney for the Kansas Sentencing Commission.
Jeff Samuda, I serve as the Secretary for the Kansas Department of Corrections.
I'm Bob Lewis. I represent Garden City in the State House, and I'm Chair of the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee. It's interesting because I kind of started my career back in the late 80s and 90s when the federal sentencing guidelines were just being implemented. And I was an assistant U.S. attorney in Los Angeles as they were constitutionalized, if you would. So I was there at the beginning in that sense, and now at the end of my career, I'm looking at sentencing guidelines again, and they're always interesting. So thank you.
I'm Elliot Smith, Senate Bill 123 Program Director.
And the real control person in the room.
I'm Brenda Harmon, Administrative Services Manager and Scott's assistant.
Could the staff introduce us? Mr. Reynolds, introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Judge Sexton. Hi, everybody. I'm Carl Reynolds. I'm down in Austin, Texas. Secretary Zamuda, good to see you again. And what a great group. I really feel privileged to join you, and I appreciate y'all accommodating us virtually here, but great to see everyone.
I'm Ellen Whelan-Wiest. I'm a managing director with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Have had the pleasure of working with Carl for a long time on projects like this, and really excited to jump into this roller coaster with you all. I also don't like roller coasters, so I'm hoping this one ends up being more exciting than terrifying. But thank you for letting us join you today.
Well, this is a necessary project. Jessica mentioned 10 years on the commission, and during that period of time, we take a look at these, and the secretary gives us the numbers, and I think you've just testified or projected 2029 is when we reach full capacity. So every year, it's like the Dutch boy putting his finger in the dike and trying to plug it up, and it gets frustrating. But it's a good fight to fight. But this appears to be possibly a good way to address the entire kit and caboodle in one stamp. So I'm excited. So the next is Scott, unless you want to add anything, the background on the grants and research framework.
Yeah, before we go any further, I think I appreciate all of the members being willing to serve on this, and this obviously is going to be a little extra lift for you, but we appreciate your willingness to to serve. You're going to get quite a bit of drinking from the fire hose, probably with this. But at the same time, it presents a wonderful opportunity to be able to look in to things. It's kind of like instead of working in the business, you're working on the business. And we'll have a chance to reflect on some of the things that have been talked about for a long time. And then some observations that our technical assistance folks at CSG are probably going to present as well. And so I see this as the purpose of the steering committee is to really do just what it is designed to do. And that up to this point, Carmen and I have pretty much directed the way as far as leading up to this point. My hope would be that the steering committee would take over in terms of deciding what are valid things that we need to study, what are other things that we need to consider outside of just data centric type of things. And so my hope would be that this group would be the collective that actually brings that recommendation as we go along to the full commission, and then later, obviously, to the legislature.
I say one thing, Scott, about the Council of State Governments. So I've had the pleasure of working with the Council of State Governments probably on 5 different projects over the last 12 years. We have a really quality partner in them. They'll bring a lot to the table and help guide our work. So I really appreciate having them at the table.
Well, thank you.
Carmen?
All right, thank you. So I'm going to start by giving everyone just kind of a broad overview of our funder, the grants we've applied for, and those that we've received related to this comprehensive review project. One of Scott's goals early on in the planning process was to have a stable funding stream that wasn't tied to the state. And so we started looking at different funders and have focused on Arnold Ventures. Arnold Ventures is a philanthropic organization in the US. They fund research and policy projects in several different core areas. One of those areas is criminal justice. And then within their criminal justice area, they have 2 arms. So they have a policy arm and they have a research arm. And we have been a little bit ambitious in trying to pursue funding from both of those arms. So when I start to talk about 2 different projects here, that's why that is. On that policy arm, we've had a bit of success already, as you all have heard about. This is the policy grant that Arnold has awarded the Council of State Government Justice Center to work with us on this comprehensive review project. The goal is to comprehensively review the guidelines and then make recommendations related to them over the period of the next 24 months. And the objective here is to provide policy analysis and data analysis that helps us identify ways that the state could make potential policy changes that could have an impact on, these concerns that we have surrounding prison capacity, while also maintaining public safety. So that's the one grant that's already been awarded on that policy side. Then on the research side, we do have an additional proposal that's currently under review. What would happen if we received that additional funding is that we would have this other project that would run concurrent to the project that we've already started. And what it would allow us to do is it would give us more funds to do more expanded stakeholder convenings, which we'll talk a bit about more here in a moment, and would also give us funds to generate research questions to help design a causal research study. So the difference then between that policy and the research grant just really has to do with what those 2 sides of the organization are really willing to fund. And in terms of that research side for that grant that's under review right now, the emphasis there is really on causal research, which is a kind of economic research where the focus is pretty narrow on testing cause and effect relationships, typically through controlled experiments. This is research evidence that's viewed as like higher quality and more rigorous. And so it would be, a great thing to have, but it's also somewhat limited in terms of the kinds of questions that you can have answered by that kind of research. But essentially, if that additional research funding comes through, we'd be able to do a study that's focused specifically with our data on our Kansas sentencing grid that could estimate the impact of imprisonment on recidivism specifically. And so we would have this additional piece of like high quality evidence that could tell us if potential adjustments to the dispositional line on the grid, if they would have any impact on public safety. So that's something that we're interested in and that's currently in review. But then on that policy side with the grant that's already been awarded, as I mentioned, there's data and research happening on that end too. And so that research that Ellen and Carl will talk more about is what Arnold would refer to as descriptive research, but in many ways, it's kind of the more important piece here because it allows us to more broadly investigate the guidelines without having to tailor things really specifically to like a causal research model, with the goal there of generating evidence that helps us develop policy recommendations for the 2028 legislative session. So all this to say, both of these projects, if they're both funded, they're geared towards investigating the guidelines, generating evidence to support policy recommendations that can address our prison capacity concerns. The difference, if we start to hear us talk about the two grants, is just really what Arnold is willing to fund within those two arms of their organization. So I think what I'll leave us with is that regardless of if that additional research grant is funded and approved, we still will be broadly investigating the guidelines and formulating these policy recommendations with the grant that has already been awarded. So that is already all in motion. What's up in the air is if we get that extra funding. So I think Ellen's going to be talking in a lot more detail about the project in a few moments here, but for now, if there's any initial questions about, the funding, the way the grants work, anything like that, I'm happy to take questions.
What's any timeline on the second possible grant?
So the second grant, if it were awarded, the first piece of it that gets awarded is a maximum of a year. But the way that they design this grant that we've applied for is that it's really meant to be a way to get your foot in the door. And so they would fund us for a year to do additional stakeholder convenings, to develop research questions, to prepare the data for like a causal research project. And then as part of that grant, we would build in time to write a proposal for what they would refer to as their full research proposal grants. And those would be larger pots of money to actually carry out that causal research.
And you and Scott worked together to write the first.
Yes.
Well done.
But,
Well done.
and Ellen did a lot of the work, and her team did the work on the policy grant. So well done to CSG on that as well.
Any questions? All right, let's try to keep us on task here. The next part of the agenda is the planning outline, the structure of planning outline. And Scott, do you want to address this? Do we have an idea or a thought with KSSG in regards to how often we need to meet? I love the idea of tying it in with the sentencing commission and being able just to have one day that we can possibly do it on the same day. But
Yeah, I had, prior to us embarking on this process, I had talked with, Minnesota, who had just recently, or actually was finishing completing, just to see how they structured everything. And I thought it might be good to present that to the committee to see whether or not they would meet concurrently with the regular commission meetings. And so they would meet, I can't remember, was it the first half or the second half, same day, and at that time as needed. I don't know, and this might be a toss to CSG as well, and we've kind of talked about that a little bit in our multiple meetings, that I don't know that the steering committee, unless they want to, needs to meet every single time the commission meets. But it would still be available because all of us would be gathered during that time. So it just seemed like a good opportunity because likely everybody would be mobilized to attend the full commission meeting that particular day. And I don't think, Ellen, you might want to chime in too, in terms of, I don't know that we're going to have a huge amount of information early on. Would you agree?
Yep, it's going to take us probably a few weeks, if not longer, on the data end of things. We're anticipating that the data analysis component of the work will begin in July. And realistically, it always takes, 6 to 8 weeks to make sure that there's something really concrete to start talking about. But what we'll also be doing in that time is Carl and I will be talking to as many people as we can and diving deeply into understanding the guidelines as they're designed, as they're implemented, as they're practiced by folks across the state. So I think the frequency, we had, Scott, I know we had talked about potentially coming back to you all in September, which I think from our perspective, we'd have a lot to tell you at that point, not hopefully too much, but you would get a lot on both our early data analysis and maybe not the entirety, but a big portion of what we've learned through stakeholder engagement. And that would be a good first time to kind of lay out for you more of the concrete findings that we're putting together.
And this, and that obviously that would potentially coincide with our normal workshop day in September. So probably a good start for meeting 2. And then we can maybe as needed or upon call of the chair. But keep in mind that leading up to this particular meeting today, Ellen and Carl have met with Francis and Chris to kind of get a baseline of sentencing guidelines 101 in Kansas. So they have and we have obviously plenty of educational materials online for them to jump and go and look at it about anything they want. We also are in the process of, I've drafted several data sharing agreements, one with KDOC, one with KBI, and one with OJA as well, to nail down that sharing agreement so that CSG has the ability to do that. And so those are still in process, but are hopefully forthcoming here in the next, hopefully several weeks. So we've tried to kind of build things up here in anticipation for this particular meeting, so that we've got something to go on, and with the idea that we've got perhaps that September date that, as Ellen and Carl will talk with you about, there is a plan between that time to be able to gather some of the great input from stakeholders, but also the data that we have.
And you're thinking about just including that in our workshop?
Yeah, I think that'll be, keep in mind the end of the rainbow here ends in 2028, where we would, and what we've looked at would be to have a legislative package to be able to present at the 2028 session. So gather that data as quickly as we can, as thoroughly as we can, have discussions surrounding that, go down those topics that we want to further tease out and study, with the idea of having a great and Ellen, I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll just quit there. But that's kind of where we're 2028 legislative session is where the roads lead.
And then we could just take that workshop, schedule the next meeting after that.
If that's what you'd like to do, sure.
Is that kind of what everybody's thinking? We can get a handle on it rather than just go ahead and setting a meeting now, wait until you get that information. Okay. What else in that section? Please.
I was just going to support that idea, Judge, because I feel like September makes sense for our first or our next juncture with you all. That we'll know so much more, not just from what we've analyzed and all the conversations we've had, but the goal is to, by the time that we bring you a list of recommendations or, our best thinking about what would be the impactful changes to the sentencing guidelines, that it doesn't feel abrupt or unfounded. And so the amount of meetings I think that we'll need by September, we'll probably have a better sense of that as well. If it feels like one more meeting on findings before we come to recommendations, or if we truly are at the halfway point. So we're up for that flexibility, and just know that for us, it's just really important that, Scott, earlier you said drinking from the fire hose. We try to avoid that as much as possible, so it doesn't feel like an overwhelming amount of information, in addition to trying to figure out, so what do we do about it in the same place?
That's the fear part of the roller coaster.
There you go. Hopefully that's the scariest part.
I think the important thing to remember as far as workflows, as far as communications, all those will be the normal emails type of stuff, so that there isn't going to be anything super fancy. It'll be the same old as far as contacting the committee.
Very good. Anything else we need to take care of under that section, Scott?
I don't think so. I think that probably that we'll be able to, Ellen and Carl can kind of go through the next steps.
The foundational discussion on topics of review. Turn it over to, and may I call you Carl and Ellen?
You bet.
Please call me Ben. I'd much prefer it. Please.
Will do. Carl, are you able to pull up the? There we go.
Yep.
I've got it. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, it's been up the whole time.
Oh, good. And Carl, you've got the controls.
I don't have the controls. I think someone
Oh,
there is
got it.
controlling.
Okay, perfect. If we can go back a couple of slides. We've covered a lot of this, and if you'll pause right here, I'll just explain. I mentioned that I work for the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and we have had the pleasure of working with Kansas on a number of projects going back even before Carl and I were doing this work together. But we are a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization that provides assistance to all three branches of state government and state leadership, with the goal of providing solutions for complex justice challenges that help make communities safer and healthier. And the three pillars of our work that you'll hear echoes of throughout how Carl and I talk about this project are using trusted data, providing practical solutions, and relying on cross-systems collaboration. So that's really our general approach to anything that we do. And then on the next slide, this is more about how we're hoping to work with you all as a steering committee and the different hats that we're going to ask you to wear over the course of our partnership with you. The first is that we will ask you to serve as the guiding body of this work, as we talked about, to receive presentations on the findings that we are gathering through our data analysis and stakeholder engagement, as well as recommendations about what to do with those findings. That will happen over the course of 2026 into 2027. We're also going to ask you to not be passive receivers necessarily, to help us understand the meaning and the implications of this. We are very humble and aware of the fact that we can learn a lot through data and through conversation and reading, but really folks like yourselves are the true experts on the ground in the state. And so you're going to have to help us understand what it all means and frankly, what to do with it. We will also be asking you to connect us to key stakeholders so that we can make sure that we're talking to the broadest possible group of people to get a really comprehensive understanding from a practitioner standpoint, how the guidelines work, how they could be better, et cetera. You will receive and consider final recommendations that we bring to you. And the goal is for you to wrestle with those to decide on what makes the most sense to then advance to the full Sentencing Commission for the Sentencing Commission's endorsement. And I can speak a little bit about this when we get to the timeline, but the next stage of work will then be for the Sentencing Commission's recommendations to be something that we want the legislature to consider. We'll rely on you to serve as experts and resources for the project as it moves into the legislative phase of work throughout 2027 into 2028. And just to say it up front, that phase of work is less defined at this point. I'll speak broadly about what we know that will involve, but I think we're going to discover that a little bit along the way as well. And then the next slide, please. Okay, so this is why we're here today, which Ben, you mentioned, and everyone I think around the table acutely understands, certainly Secretary Zamuda and folks from the Sentencing Commission who helped produce the report last year that concluded that without intervention, the state's prison population is on track to exceeding the built capacity of state prisons in just a few years by fiscal year 2029. And that between 2025 and 2035, Kansas is facing a growth of about 21% or 2,500 additional people who will be incarcerated in prison. this will require new construction or major renovation of existing facilities, or potentially both, which would run into the hundreds of millions of dollars required of taxpayer funding and investment into corrections in that way. And I think crucially in the report, the Sentencing Commission pointed out that the projected growth is driven primarily by sentencing policy, not increases in crime. So this, for us, and certainly as Carmen and Scott presented this opportunity to Arnold Ventures, is the driving problem statement, if you will. It's the crisis that's driving the need for this sentencing review at this moment in time. Next slide, please. This is also just speaking to sort of the immediate cost drivers that we know Kansas is dealing with. And actually, Secretary Zamuda, I've pulled out an article that specifically spoke to your work last fall, testifying to legislative committees about the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, the imminent or immediate needs there to renovate that facility and also to expand its capacity for about 400 additional beds, which you had estimated would cost around $500 to $750 million today to do. And then this other sort of pull headline, if you will, speaks to something we already know and are hearing about from Francis and Chris and other folks in the state, which is the ongoing legislative additions to the guidelines and bills that are proposed and enacted that inevitably or inherently enhance sentencing lengths of time and other pieces in the guidelines that lead to increases in the population and cost increases as well. I also want to uplift another area of research that the Justice Center has been very involved in over the last couple of years, which is looking at clearance rates or solve rates, particularly for violent crime across the country. We did a deep dive into what those look like state by state. And like many states, Kansas has a clearance or a solve rate, at least as of 2024, that was below 50% for violent crimes across the state. Again, that's not out of step with most other states in the country, but from a perspective of providing sort of accountability and justice, certainly to victims of crime, it's a lower crime rate than I think folks, or solve rate than folks would think is ideal, particularly for violent crimes. And lifting this up partly because in the context of talking about prison population growth and projections in the future, the current prison population projection inherently or implicitly includes these lower clearance rates, as it should. It wouldn't make sense for the Sentencing Commission to assume increases in clearance rates over time. But the question that we ask is, if Kansas as a state were to invest in policies or practices that did increase the clearance rate, what would that mean for your prison population projections and growth? And assuming that led to more convictions and sentences for violent offenses, then I think it's fair to reason that you would end up with more people entering into your prison system for longer stays. So a question that we are asking that I just, again, want to lift up for all of you in the context of this project is there a sentencing system for Kansas that could accommodate an increase in clearance rates and accountability for violent crime without inherently growing your prison population and your sentence lengths exponentially greater than what you've already projected? These three factors for us create sort of the inflection point that we see Kansas being at, that it essentially answers the question of why this project, this review at this moment. You've got rising prison populations and associated costs and clearance rates that are falling short of delivering justice. So we're hoping that together in partnership with you all, we can address these or seek to understand these two main areas of focus. So we're focusing on where the sentencing guidelines can deliver consistent, proportional sentences statewide, as they were originally intended to do, and where targeted sentencing changes can better protect public safety without driving unnecessary system growth in the future. This is our timeline. And so as Scott mentioned, this project is very much designed to lead into and to inform the 2028 legislative session. And this, I'll say, was largely driven by the wisdom of Scott and Carmen from the Sentencing Commission, pointing out that in the political season that Kansas is in, with an imminent change in administration and new legislators and new legislative leadership, it would not be wise to be driving towards having recommendations for 2027. That in addition to probably wanting more time for something of this nature to really be able to be understood and embraced by a wider audience of leadership, that it might also make sense to get to 2028 and for that to be the targeted area for hopefully recommendations that could be translated into new legislation. And so working backwards from there, what we have is a concentrated period of time in 2026 that is a little bit scary, but we think we can do it, focusing on data analysis, which you see in these yellow blocks. Like I mentioned, we're in the process of accessing the data that the Department of Corrections and the Sentencing Commission are making available to us now. And the analysis we expect to kick off in July and last at least 2 or maybe through November, but we'll have information to share with you along the way. And at the same time, Carl and I are going to dive right in starting today, and then moving forward with, like I said, broad, comprehensive stakeholder engagement. And then hopefully a couple of convenings that Carmen was speaking to for that other funded piece of work from Arnold Ventures, where we'll be able to bring together larger groups of stakeholders and practitioners to really learn from them in person. But we're going to just try to talk to as many people as we can. And like I said earlier, we're going to ask for your help steering us in the right direction and in cases making connections where we need to. Starting in the fall, we'll begin developing recommendations, and actually being in person, our plan is to join you all in person in September if we're able, hopefully. And the goal there will be not just to share findings with you, but to start brainstorming ideas, right? It will be a little bit preliminary, certainly, for finding final recommendations, but we'll learn a lot from you as we're telling you more of what we're learning about the directions that we may be heading and coming back in early 2027 with really final recommendations for your consideration, your refinement to advance to the Sentencing Commission. And then at that point, once there's something that the full Sentencing Commission feels comfortable recommending to a broader audience, again, of legislators, the goal will be to spend the remainder of 27 leading into the 2028 legislative session just doing a lot of outreach, a lot of if it includes testimony, if it includes meeting with people, if it includes educating folks, to both share what those recommendations are and everything that informed them, and also to refine them further so that by the time they land in front of Representative Lewis and other folks, that it feels more palatable and more realistic and something that the legislature is prepared to move forward with. So those are all of the different streams of work and how we're structuring them right now from a timeline perspective. I mentioned earlier that I'm sorry, if you go back just one piece, this last piece of the refinement of recommendations with a legislative audience, not exclusively, but primarily in mind, it's not as clear to us what that exactly looks like or what your role will be. And that's the piece of things I just wanted to explain, that we'll be probably answering that along the way in the next several months of what will really be necessary and how we might ask for some of your assistance in developing the right strategy to make this something that feels actionable by 2028. Thank you. And so this is, I'll explain more about what we mean when we say data analysis or quantitative analysis. I mentioned that we're going to be looking at KDOC and Sentencing Commission, sentencing admissions, length of stay, supervision, and corrections cost data. So that's the type of data that we're going to be accessing and analyzing. And the focus areas that we're going to be diving into are on admissions trends, length of stay, key sentencing drivers for population growth, criminal history scoring, grid and offense severity classifications, and enhancements and departures. All of that we're hoping will give us a really strong and wide look at kind of all of the different junctures and pressure points that are leading to, from a sentencing perspective, that are leading to and contributing to the prison population growth. And then the goal is to share with you what we're finding, also to build out a modeling tool, a scenario modeling tool that will be user friendly, that will incorporate this case level data so that anybody can test out different policy options, and how changes in sentencing on a lot of different factors might affect population and cost over time. And really that's the last piece of things that we want to bring to you all, is not just here's what's happening, but here's what could happen if these scenarios changed in these ways. All of the data is going to help us answer these 5 questions, we hope, and probably more that pop up along the way. How current sentencing, like I said, is driving the prison population up to this point and moving forward, and also what would happen if certain policies and practices changed. The impact of criminal history scoring on sentences, and if there are certain offense types that inflate criminal history in ways that don't reflect the original intent of the guidelines as they were designed. What departure rates tell us about practitioner behavior, and how sentences are actually imposed in relation to departures from what the guidelines would say. How different changes in guidelines along the way over the past 33 years, including the enactment of special rules, have potentially produced unintended complexity or disparities in sentencing outcomes. And then this last one is really about recidivism: who returns to prison or is rearrested after they're released, and at what rates across offense types and severity levels. For us, this is really essential because it speaks to some of the public safety components that we know have to be really baked in and highlighted throughout anything like this. No one wants to change the guidelines with the fear of then decreasing public safety. The goal is always to uphold and strengthen it along the way. I think Carl is going to speak to you more about our stakeholder engagement and also how we understand the Kansas sentencing guidelines to fit into a national context.
Thanks, Ellen. Again, great to be with you all. Thank you for having us. And, Ellen has gone into detail. I want to pause a little bit. Did Ellen's comments trigger any burning questions or comments from you all before I start talking? Okay, I'm seeing none. This is, the work that we do is always a marrying of quantitative analysis and qualitative understanding. And we've talked about how we hope to get a lot of qualitative understanding from this very group. Certainly that will unfold as time passes. But we also want to get out there and talk to key stakeholders, and we want your help knowing who those people are, and even things like when those people have their conference, that might be an opportunity to hit up a bunch of them at one time, that sort of thing, just insider information that you all will have. I know you all learned a lot about the Minnesota process that they went through. I saw that Nate Wrights did a presentation over Zoom to you all last year. Nate's an old buddy of mine and Scott's, and it was great to hear from him how that unfolded. I did want to note that the Minnesota project, they had this arm of state government that did kind of what Ellen and I are doing, the MAD group, and they went out and interviewed people beyond what we think we're going to be capable of doing. This process that we're going to engage in is really going to be focused on the people who use the guidelines: judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and importantly, the people that have to figure out the scoring, the folks that do PSIs and have to understand those out-of-state convictions and the complexities of criminal history and so on. We really want to engage with them and understand from their perspective how this might be simplified and made more clear for the folks that are literally working with their sleeves rolled up in the guidelines. So with that, I'll move to the next slide, and I want to spend a minute sort of zooming out and talking about the long history in the last 60 years or so. This is basically my lifetime. And I thought if any audience would appreciate a single diagram of American sentencing history, it would be you all. Representative Lewis, I was happy to hear you refer to your experience back in the 1980s when the sentencing guidelines were adopted at the federal level in 1984. And that was a big part of the picture. Before that, back in the 50s and 60s in ancient times, um, all states and the federal government had basically indeterminate systems where the legislature adopts a range of punishment for different offenses, and judges and practitioners arrive at individual sentences, and parole boards let people out of prison at some point in time. Very indeterminate systems, like the description of the US Supreme Court. They described the ancient way in the Mistretta case back in 1989, when the Sentencing Guidelines Commission was challenged as a violation of separation of powers at the federal level. It was upheld, of course, very tortured interpretation back then. But that's the era when I first started personally learning about this stuff. I worked in the Texas Senate in the 80s, and we were going through huge crises and building prisons like nobody's business. And we even took a look at adopting sentencing guidelines in the early 90s. And so I wanted to highlight that era because it's when Kansas and North Carolina in 1993/94, the last two states to adopt what I would call true sentencing guidelines. So 33 years ago, you all were at the cutting edge, and you still are. No one has done anything like what Kansas did since you did it. It's kind of amazing how stagnant, frankly, this discipline has become in the last 30 years. I also wanted to note on the very left side of this slide that Law Without Order is a book that was published by Judge Frankel from the federal courts, and basically critiquing this whole indeterminate idea and the wide discretion that was embedded in federal sentencing. And Law Without Order proposed the idea of having sentencing commissions and having sentencing guidelines, very much the model that Kansas ended up embracing in 1993 and has embraced from this point forward. So not only has it been 33 years since you adopted guidelines, it's been 53 years since the very idea of this kind of system was generated by a federal judge. And Scott will recall, we've had some interesting look backs at our National Association of Sentencing Commission meetings over the last couple of years because of Judge Frankel's book, and kind of taking stock of what's happened in the last 50 years since then. And it's also been about 30 years since the National Association of Sentencing Commissions started. Scott and I have both been quite involved in that, him more so in the past as a former executive committee. I'm on the executive committee now. But that group has been going for 30 plus years, bringing together the folks from sentencing commissions around the country. Really, really positive, really an audience that's hungry for sharing information among states. It's really been a fulfilling thing. And by the way, Scott, I don't know if you know, but I got to be at the very first meeting of that group when Kevin Wrights pulled a bunch of us together in Colorado when he was still at the University of Colorado back in the 90s. Texas had a very brief, short-term sentencing commission that the legislature enacted, and I was the director of that group, and that's really how I got into this whole world of really being fascinated by the different kinds of systems that states adopt for sending people to prison and getting them out of prison, essentially sentencing and parole and so forth. One other thing I want to stress on this page is that back in the 60s, states were in the process of adopting a new model penal code. The American Law Institute adopted the model penal code back in the 60s, 61, I think. As I understand it, Kansas never formally adopted the model penal code, but did build a penal code back in 69 based on the structure of the model penal code. So you are what I would call a model penal code state, thank goodness. But more recently, just in the last couple of years, Kevin Wrights surfaces again as the reporter for the ALI Model Penal Code sentencing. And I just wanted to stress that body of work, because your system reflects, for the most part, exactly what the Model Penal Code recommends that states do. You have a high-functioning sentencing commission with a good staff, adequately funded for the most part, good research capability, et cetera. So your commission existence is solid compared to many other states. And you have this set of sentencing guidelines that they're elegant. They they embody these two grids that compare offense severity and criminal history offender characteristics in a way that tidily arrives at suggested sentences for people and allows for departures, et cetera, et cetera. Very much not only the model that Judge Frankel suggested 53 years ago, but the model that the model penal code has re-endorsed, if you will, just a couple of years ago. Okay, I'll stop talking on that page. And frankly, I don't have too much more to say to you except to reassure you, next page, please, that from my perspective, you have a very strong foundation, that your system is solid and good and is an example of one of the better systems in the country. This is just to give you an idea of where you are sort of from a national perspective. A bunch of states still rely on parole to determine how most people and when most people get out of prison, the states that are in blue on this map. The gray states are those that in general did away with parole back in the era when states were turning to determinate sentencing. California, Maine, Florida, states with sentence systems that are very much determinate so that when a person is sentenced, you know what's going to happen, but also systems that don't rely on any kind of guidelines at the front end. And in contrast to that, you all, Kansas, Minnesota, Oregon, Washington, Virginia, and North Carolina are the states that back in the 90s and even in the 80s in some cases did away with the idea of parole release, but enacted a set of sentencing guidelines that really helped to tailor what's happening at the front end of the system. So to me, those are the states that are comparators with yours in terms of these key policy issues. Next slide, please. Looking at those states, the ones that have sentencing grids like yours just kind of fits right in this body of work. Michigan is unusual. They have 9 grids, and the logic of their system is a little fuzzy, frankly. It's not one to emulate. They have 9 grids that end up with 258 cells. Their system is very complicated. Whereas you're right there in the middle of this chart with your 2 grids, non-drug and drug, adding up to a total of 154 cells. And I thought it was interesting to look at the number of columns in the different grids. That different states have chosen different ways of scoring and counting criminal history. And again, your system is kind of right there in the pack, right? Pennsylvania and North Carolina both have 5 or 6 columns. Other states have more, and you're in there with 9 criminal history scores. Again, kind of near the top along with Washington, but that's something we want to unpack and take a look at, not only what the effect of the increase in criminal history scores are, but how complicated it is to come up with those scores and how, whether it's worth all the work that it takes to figure those things out. One of the things that Ellen and I learned in Michigan was they have this elaborate scoring for criminal history there, and it almost never really matters. We showed them that hardly anybody ever even gets up to level 2 or 3, so it never really drives a decision. It's just literally just work. Next slide, please. This is going to take one click at a time. I want to show you, yeah, there you go. This is the Pennsylvania grid. Pennsylvania kind of led the way in the modern era, the era that Scott and I have had the chance to observe. They engaged in a 10-year process of rejiggering their guidelines, and this is their newer grid. It's the 8th edition of the Pennsylvania guidelines, but you can see it has some of the same ideas as your grid. It has disposition zones where different punishments, different accountability measures are essentially recommended. Now, Pennsylvania is a state that has sentencing guidelines for determining the minimum, but they also rely on parole release to actually determine how long someone stays in prison. So that's a pretty significant distinction from yours. If I could have another click. This is the Minnesota grid. Minnesota has 3 grids. This is their standard non-drug grid. They have a drug grid and a sex offense grid also. But again, similar pattern to yours. You can see a disposition zone where the presumption is probation in gray and a disposition zone in white where the presumption is prison. Maybe the most apples to apples comparison in terms of your guidelines system to theirs. Another click will show Oregon, and this is a superficial thing, but I've always been struck by the fact that most of these grids start at the lower left-hand corner. That's the lightest crimes, the least criminal history. Your system and Oregon's start in the lower right-hand corner, so that the things that are the punishments that are the most serious and severe are in the upper left-hand corner. Superficial, but again, you can see that Oregon, like you, relies on some disposition zones that suggest where people ought to end up as a result of their scoring on the grid. Washington grids is next. And Washington has really struggled with rethinking their grid over time, and I don't think they've ever really succeeded. And their commission, honestly, has struggled as an entity in state government. And again, this is one thing I really like about what's happened in Kansas. You guys have stood by a commission for all these years. The state has continued to fund it. You've had excellent staff, Scott. I didn't realize you'd been there for 15 years. I mean, that's the essence of what states really need to be doing, is supporting a commission going forward. And so kudos to you all and for undertaking this project. And then finally, the North Carolina sentencing grid, again, a lower left orientation. And North Carolina is busier. They include aggravated ranges and mitigated ranges within each block of their grid. So they get a little more in detail. And North Carolina has been one of the states that's really, I think, succeeded in tying sentencing policy to correctional resources. And all of these states are good examples of tying those two things together. As your organic statute says, linking together justice and corrections in one embodiment of sentencing guidelines. And I think if you'll click again, I think that's the last thing that I wanted to reflect you all. Again, just the idea of putting this in national perspective. If you needed it, reassuring you that you are on solid ground moving forward as we take a look at what's happened to your guidelines in the last 33 years, what the role of the legislature has been in carving things out, and whether some more clarity and simplification is possible. And as Ellen has stressed, whether your system can bear what sentencing brings to it from a correction standpoint, particularly if the law enforcement increases and there's more people being apprehended for serious crimes. How is that all going to fit together? So, Ellen, I think you're up next.
Sure. I mean, this is really just the next steps that we laid out for you all. And then we're hoping to use the remainder of our time, or at least a chunk of it, learning from you. So these are our opening questions. But actually, I think one could be just sort of any reflections you have on what we've shared before process, or some of the early findings or content and Carl's take on the structure of the guidelines as they stand. And then to get a little bit deeper, we're wondering kind of where you see the sentencing guidelines meeting or falling short of, as Carl said, their intended objective of linking justice and corrections policies. What does that mean from your perspective and how you've interacted with the guidelines? And where do they maybe not meet that goal in their everyday operations? Pulling back to think about this work together and conducting a comprehensive review of the guidelines, what you see as the primary objectives of this project, and also what your take is on the appetite for significant change in the guidelines versus tailored modifications. That would be helpful. And we're going to learn a lot more about that, I think, as we have conversations with folks, but it's a question that we've been turning over. And then, to bring in the question that we've raised around clearance rates, should this project account for an interest in addressing and solving more violent crimes? And that would really just be a question of understanding, again, kind of the appetite for change and whether or not this is a system, like Carl said, that could accommodate the current projected growth, or maybe potentially a different scenario under which more violent crimes are solved and lead to some kind of sentencing. But truly, this is now just our time to learn from you and to answer any questions you have, or to reflect on anything you can share with us.
Discussion?
Come on, people, don't be shy.
I think from a planning perspective, and obviously Carmen and I have been at this since October, technically, of thinking about these things and having these conversations with Ellen and Carl. And some of the things that we think are important may not be so important to the stakeholders. And so I think that stakeholder, and we heard that from Minnesota as well, that stakeholder engagement piece is essential to receiving guidance as to what people on the ground are feeling in terms of what's going on right with the guidelines, what could be changed. And if we get enough of those folks that are saying the same thing, I think we kind of have our somewhat of marching orders there. But that stakeholder piece, I think, is going to be even more important. That Carl going out to do those things, and we've talked about having one in Wichita, one in Topeka, in person, and then the rest virtual. But we will probably need some assistance there, and I think it would be those discussions will be more robust. They will be further enhanced by having some type of intermediary between Carl and the stakeholders. And whether that's a staff member, whether that's a steering committee member that can help bridge that gap from the primer that they have of the guidelines and from the years of experience that all of you have. And so, you'll probably know a lot of these folks too, that when we go to, they come to Topeka, we go to Wichita, those type of things. So I think it would be incumbent that would be helpful to be able to have a committee member, have a staff member that would be able to go and liaise basically with Carl on that. And I think we get a whole lot more goodness from that as a result of because sometimes Carl's not going to know the answer, what the questions to ask. Those of us who's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years we'll have that perspective to be able to and I've mentioned before that I don't, the folks that we're dealing with here, I don't think it's going to be very difficult. Those that show up at these convenings, I don't think it's going to be very difficult to get them to talk. Because we have attorneys that we're meeting with. We have probation officers who are normally very vocal. And so I don't think we're going to have trouble folks talking. It's just going to be a matter of how does that fit into the grand scheme of things with where Carl is going and is wanting to gather that input. I also think that even though we are going to be able to get data, we are also going to need to have some type of probably ancillary or other factors that are running parallel to this that probably have to make their way into these discussions. And what do I mean by that? I don't know. Things that are not data driven. Other things, employment things, law enforcement vacancies, those type of things that we're probably going to have to account for. How we do that, I don't know, but that's those type of things that are going to be I think are going to be important. The other thing would be, do we go to a situation where, do we go down that road of talking with offenders? Would that be a fruitful discussion? Those are all things I think that the committee needs to decide, whether or not that's a viable situation or not.
You know, the question that sticks out to me, and I always think of Russ Jennings, is when he would talk to us about, well, you can talk about all pie in the sky here in this room, but across the street, you need to be realistic. And so that question is what the appetite, significant change, tailored modification to guidelines. In your discussion in regards to making the community safety a critical partner in this is big in order to sell this. And when I started looking, Scott and I started looking about the steering committee, I guarantee you the people in the steering committee may have not spoken that much today, but I hear them every month when we have meetings. They're all extremely smart, extremely capable, and they have very strong views, which I encourage them to make. But that idea of it's important that we take a look at this because every year we go in and we talk about bed space and we talk about, well, we can make a change here. And we talk about one little nugget. And then depending on whether it's election year or not, the appetite across the street is either lukewarm or not at all. And so that's what we face. And I know, Carl, you've talked to us before about certain programs, and I mean, great programs, but whether or not they're going to fly in Kansas is another story. So it's very important that we stay realistic, that we stay measured. And that's why Representative Lewis is such critical, and Secretary Demuth are such critical members of the steering committee to help us in that regard.
Yeah, and I'd just say that I think this is really exciting. I'm very excited to be part of it. I like that it's trying to be comprehensive and take a look at all the different things that you have to look at in this area. One thing that I think somebody mentioned, but I'm personally begun to get focused on is our recidivism rate. There was an interesting article a couple days ago in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if anyone saw it. There's a nonprofit group whose name escapes me that's been working with several states. And the gist of the idea is that they will help, and they've done it in Texas and California and some others, to coordinate all of the different information that you have on inmates that have been released. And it allows then for them to get better services, more comprehensive services. And at least according to the article, there was something in the order of 15% reduction in recidivism. That's just one piece of this broader puzzle about, my much bed space we're going to need, but that is a piece that I think my committee is going, if I'm reelected, will be taking a look at recidivism, and two, I commit to bringing this issue to the fore early in the next session to inform the and leadership about what we're doing, what we expect to do, what the timeline is. And so I'm really excited to be part of this, and this feeds into, as you've heard, to the whole issue of bed space. I've already in the last session started to soften people up on that issue. And one of the first things I will be talking to the new leadership, because we have a new speaker, somebody's going to be new speaker. December is, we have to do something with our old prison in Hutchinson. We have to get more bed space, but we also have to consider, guidelines so that we're incarcerating people that need to be incarcerated and not those that don't.
Please.
I think you called me out, that I've been very vocal.
I tried.
So, just as a way to inform and start discussion, as I was thinking through these questions, preliminary thoughts that I have shared throughout the years. I'm entering my 20th year of practice as a criminal prosecutor, utilizing the sentencing guidelines. And I teach a lot on the criminal justice system in Kansas and what it means. I am a supporter of determinate sentences. I believe that it helps victims ultimately understand what the parameters are. I think I'll leave it to my counterpart to discuss how defendants look at that. But as a prosecutor, I guess my frustration has been and is, as I answer that first question, is that there are sometimes our crimes that we have that we really are looking at boxes to see how we can negotiate that case to get it to the right box. There's other crimes that we have that the box that they fall within is not the appropriate sentence. And sometimes that's less, sometimes it's more. Because we had this grid and these boxes and these numbers, and I'll say within this sacred area, we threw in a box to see if they worked and were right. And then we took these crimes and we threw them on these severity levels. And then we assigned them to these boxes based on criminal history, which may or may not be the right way to inform those sentences. And then we said, let's see what happens. And so for the most part, I think we've done a great job. But every year, the legislature adds crimes. We discuss how they should be placed back on these severity levels to see if they're comparable or not. And I feel like, and why I've been a big supporter of this comprehensive review, is that now we have so many different severity levels placed in so many different boxes without really looking at whether they're meaningful anymore. Does it really mean anything if somebody commits second-degree intentional murder and has zero criminal history, should get less time than somebody who has a couple drug offenses? Like, really, is that the same thing? Or should somebody get probation or prison as opposed to probation on a lower level offense because, of the factors of that one? And so I feel like we've just added things. And so what it means, and I think Scott alluded to this, is sometimes I'm just speaking with victims' families. I'm speaking with the defense attorney. I'm speaking with law enforcement about what is justice in this case and how do we make the grid work. And some of those pleas, which I think is what's not spoken in the data, is prosecutors and defense attorneys in the system trying to make the system work. And the system has been stagnant for so long that we are using our best experience, judgment, knowledge, ethics, legal principles to try to fit somebody in a box. That might not be the right box, but it may be the only box that we can get to because of the information and the parameters that we have. And of course, a lot of that is also control freaks, wanting to make sure that the judge doesn't do anything. So the data is going to be great, but when you're looking at departures, when you're looking about different dispositions, it might not have been that box was where they wanted to be. It may have been that the box was somewhere else, and that's all that we had left to be able to utilize. And so what it means to me is that we really look at all of our crimes, and are they even the right severity levels? Should they be in different severity levels? When I think of significant changes versus tailored modifications, I think changing the numbers in the box as a tailored modification, but others might think of that as a significant change. I think about whether we should weight criminal history as heavily as we do for all types of offenses and what that looks like. I see a lot of first-time offenders that commit violent crimes. And is there a difference between nonviolent crimes and violent crimes and how that plays in? I don't know the right answer to that, but that's how, as a prosecutor, I navigate the sentencing guidelines and try to handle what that review looks like. And then, of course, to the point of addressing and solving more violent crimes, that is always our goal. I think that is a huge resource issue, and it is a goal that I believe as a state public safety policymaker, we are always looking towards that and making sure that when we do that, we are accounting for the right space to keep the right people in prison and allow the others that can get reform, services, treatment, therapy, all other things in our communities to be able to have access and the ability to do that in those communities. So that's kind of my overall, here you go, let's go. Goal in this is really digging deep and seeing how we can make it meaningful again, because really, from my perspective, it's not as meaningful as it was at the beginning. I mean, we thought we knew what we were doing, and then now it's like, how can we get to a box? So now it's just math.
The last point, what changed? I mean, is it just that, why was it meaningful then and not now?
I think the special rules play into it. The different legal rulings on criminal history play into it. What out-of-state convictions are and what in-state convictions count and how those work. The severity levels of some of our crimes and how they've been placed in a box that we might not believe is the appropriate box for them to be placed at, but it was what the legislature was willing to do. There are crimes that, from my perspective, should be presumptive prison that were placed in a presumptive probation box because of the bed space impact. And so they knew it would cost more if they put it at a different level. And so, I mean, I presented my own legislative proposals to that, knowing that the appetite for adopting a new law on aggravated domestic violence is that if I put it in a border box and not a presumptive prison, I'll have more of a chance of it getting adopted. So those sentencing policies and having to see what the legislature's appetite have changed some of those recommendations. And so what was clear cut at the beginning now has, how many special rules do we have, Francis?
I get at least 52, 53.
And then all the legislative, not the legislative, but the judicial rulings
Right.
that have to accompany all of that now.
Right.
Some great insight. I hope that we get to spend some more time with you and hear more from you. And even see some of those proposals. That would be helpful for me to think about how this kind of thing looks at the back end. What sort of ideas have come up and been considered.
You know, it's really kind of market driven because, as Jessica said, the plea agreements that are entered into, and then you're starting to see a little bit of that. We had legislation passed this year that a judge under certain circumstances can't make a disposition of departure unless the parties agree to it. So you're seeing some of that played out in real time, trying to take the discretion away from the bench and being successful at it. And maybe rightfully so, but what I see is and I think that's right, but it's dependent upon having good prosecutors and good defense attorneys for that to happen. For what Jessica laid out, and I see it happen because, you know, I'm blessed with having good prosecutors and good defense attorneys. My fear is having a judicial district that doesn't have a good prosecutor or doesn't have a robust defense attorney, and that not happening and those individuals being treated differently and unfairly. That's the critical stage. So I think the agreement on when we make a departure, I think those are important because generally they're plea agreement driven, a large majority of them. I think those indicate on where law enforcement is, where the prosecutors are, where defense attorneys are, and those are critical to take a look at.
Yeah.
I think just general proportionality that we're talking about, that you know, that's I think a relatively easy exercise in theory. And you know, we could put up, you know, huge Post-it notes all around this room with all of the crimes and the certain particular articles of the statute and go down one by one. The system itself is inherently driven to chaos, I believe, just simply because And I don't say that in a harsh way. I just say it in it, you know, when you have year after year after year, you have year one, we have all sorts of things are going on. There are certain interests that are happening. That's what we're going to concentrate on. Next year, legislative session comes out, we've got other issues, you know, maybe it's not as big of a deal. Property taxes is on the minds of everyone. We don't do as much, but we do a little bit here. Then next year, we did a little bit more. Then, and so you have this piecemeal, it's just part of the process. And so at some point, where do you pull that back in? And can you do that in such a way that it is a wholesale change of saying, we are changing all of these crimes to this particular severity level. We're changing all of these crimes. These are increasing penalties. We're lowering here. We're keeping these the same. And, you know, I think that would be a significant lift. And I think what you're talking about here in terms of in 2027, if we get to that point, you're going to have to be trying to have stakeholder buy-in during that particular time. And of course, not everybody's going to agree with all of the things that have been made, that type of thing. Hopefully there's enough give and take there that it's going to be something that would be significantly improving the system. And not everybody's going to get what they get because that's just the way the process works. But we'll have enough of a change that we will have pulled things back in so that you don't have drug and second degree murder issues like Jessica is talking about.
I do think that there's certain things that both sides are often negotiating about because everyone recognizes it's not the right thing to be considering, criminal history being a big one. The overemphasis on our grid for criminal history, you know, a murder is a murder regardless of what your prior history is. It kind of inflates things that shouldn't be. And especially when you're using criminal history from like juvenile or crimes that aren't necessarily violent crimes, but are still classified as person felonies that increase and make someone look like a very serious offender when maybe the reality is they're not. And I think both sides negotiate about that pretty heavily. So I think there's a couple of things is that most of the time when the parties are negotiating about those things and trying to change where we're at on the grid, it's because, you know, if we're trying to move down, it's because we don't really think this is a public safety risk, right? Like we all look at this and go, well, this looks real serious, but we don't actually think this is a public safety risk. So how do we get out of where we're at on the grid? Or, you know, the grid isn't taking into account certain factors that make this more dangerous than usual. And so I think, you know, if the focus is really on public safety and using our, you know, corrections space effectively for the people who are a risk when they're in the public, that I think that's where you're going to find the most agreement, both between all the practitioners and the legislature. Like, I think that's where we have the most ability to make change is if everyone can kind of come to a consensus on, you know, who do we really want to have in our prison facilities? Do we want people who are simply drug users? Do we want people who are low-level property crimes? I mean, ideally, those aren't the people we want in our prison facility. Those are people we want to work on rehabilitation. So I think kind of focusing it that way and finding the points where everyone agrees things are overemphasizing factors that we really don't think should determine that sentence. It feels like that might be where we have the best luck with the legislature as well.
The two Jessicas are really smart. Really smart.
I think you both touched on that issue of criminal history and how much, there's plenty of research on that. And I think probably Carl and Ellen could probably pull that forward, that how much emphasis, you know, we put a big emphasis on criminal history. That's part of that's the big two, you know, it's the severity level and the criminal history. How do you actually change a system which that is the major point of, one of the 2 points that we're actually looking as far as punishment. So, plenty of research to show that, criminal history, the farther you're going out, it becomes less and less significant and important. How do we do that? Do we look back at juvenile crime and decide, some of those states have decided not to include that as criminal history? Will that help? Won't it help? I think all those things could be discussed as to, most people are going to say those are person crimes that they committed while they were juveniles. Well, do we keep them? We're decaying most of the rest of the stuff. But at the same time, if they do become adults and continue to recidivate, where are we at then? And, those are all, I think those are all in that criminal history realm that could easily be explored. Pretty easy.
Another point on the criminal history, Scott, that I think, and I'll admit I'm guilty of doing, is that, well, I can't get much on this case, but I'm gonna get them to plead to X number of felonies or X number of person misdemeanors or whatever, so that if they do reoffend, then they're gonna get a higher sentencing level. And so using the guidelines in a way that punishes recidivism. So at the moment, they'll be willing to take whatever it looks like, right? Because they're getting probation, but they're just taking whatever it is. But then like using that as a way to maybe discourage recidivism, because there'll be a D, or they're going to be a higher level the next time they come around. And so that is being taken into account as we plead out cases every single day. Is, do this, but build the criminal history so that the next time they come through, they're higher. And if we went actually more towards a sentencing grid that mattered more about the severity level and less about the criminal history, then we were actually seeking, I think, justice for the crime it is, and not necessarily just trying to utilize criminal history to get something better next time.
You get those cases where they plead from felonies down to 3 Class A person misdemeanors. And, that's one of those things. And it's probably not justice in that case, but they're building on down the line for the person felony. It puts them in, presumptive prison guidelines.
What about that last one? Interest in addressing or solving violent crime.
Were you aware of that? I'm just curious. Were both of you aware that we have 50%?
I did not know it was at that level. It's also interesting to see where it dipped and then came back up on that slide.
Yeah, I was like, what happened in 2018? That was a bad year.
But it's also
I will.
interesting to think about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
I'm
just
so
going to say,
sorry,
I'm going to no. I'm just going to email everyone the webpage that we have on our website that specifically breaks down for Kansas, because there are a few different ways that you can look at it by types of, this is all based on NIBRS data, but I'll send it to you all. You can play around with it too. Please keep going.
If I recall, those were the years where we had a significant increase in violent crimes, which may account for the lower percentage of solved crimes.
Yeah.
Because of the increase, that the solvability did not keep up with the increase, and then it came back down, I think, after 18. I absolutely am interested in that, but I don't know how we measure that, especially when we think about our prison projections. I mean, how do we anticipate? And again, that goes back to what I was trying to say, is things that are not accounted for. Resources, I think, in law enforcement, a decline in general of individuals wanting to go into law enforcement, the ability to work in that area.
Sometimes declining cooperation with law enforcement in communities.
Yes.
I wonder if focusing specifically on proportionality and keeping the sentences higher for violent crimes and minimizing it for crimes that aren't, things that we think should be incarceratory, that maybe law enforcement prioritizes resources for violent crime then. So it may not be that we have the ability to directly go at that, but putting the emphasis on those more violent crimes might actually shift how law enforcement prioritizes things.
But this legislative session, we've just had a House bill pass that dramatically changes, and that was built upon a property crime, right? Guy goes out and robs a bunch of stuff from a construction place, and the guy that owns a construction company looking on the street and sees a guy walking down the street in the very near future and gets upset, talks to his legislator, and that created a House bill that I think has had everybody on their toes now, and it goes into effect July 1st. That I think is going to have a big change in regards to populations in jails. Eventually is going to modify it on down the line. I think the bed space like was 300 that was projected.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that bill itself will actually be a specific assumption that we're going to have to make within the projections, which normally bills do not have that impact on, justice reinvestment did when we did that, but usually singular bills don't have that much of a significance to be able to think about including it for an assumption. So it is going to have that impact. I think that all of those, there was a lot going on in that particular bill, bonds,
You're being so
sentencing, and there was a lot for, there was a lot in it for a lot of people, but I think you're right, Judge. There is some trepidation there in terms of, I've heard probation officers that are even concerned about what impact that's going to have, and certainly the jails are going to be they're going to have a few more folk. I think the flip side of that, of course, is the counterpoint is well, shouldn't those repeat offenders be the ones that should be there, and you're not having to worry about some of these other folks.
I get it.
So, time will tell us how that actually works. But yeah, I think it's going to be closely watched by many people.
But what I was trying to bring up is we talk about violent crime, but yet sometimes it's that property crime that's a big driver.
Yep. What was the bill number? Do you all recall?
2444.
Okay, thanks.
Other than that, I don't remember what it was.
Got it.
It was enough that I have laminated flow sheets front and back of a whole scenario that you have to go through now.
Wow.
Wow.
Put that out, Judge.
I've got 3 or 4 of them from different, but I think OJ sent one out. If you haven't, I'll send it to you. I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to. I've got a whole stack. It is. I got a whole stack to hand out to my judges on Friday.
We've been working through it in my office. It's a lot.
I'll send you everything.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's plenty here to look at.
Target-rich environment.
Yeah, great comments. This is really helpful.
Now you just got to fix it for us and then bring it to us.
Like I said, we'll be communicating with you all, in touch with Carmen and with Scott, obviously, on a very regular basis. And we're mapping out our plans for who we're talking to. But I've sent you an email just to give you the webpage that I was referencing in the slide deck that you saw, where you can see more on clearance rates up to 2024. So we acknowledge, there are a couple of years of data there that we haven't included yet. I will send out a follow-up email to the group after this meeting, just so you have my contact information and Carl's as well. And truly just any brainstorming ideas of individuals, associations, groups of people, parts of the state that you would point us to. We're eager to hear about it. We've got our list, and obviously Scott is a huge resource in thinking this through, but that we're hoping that every conversation leads to 3 more conversations, right? So that we can just keep talking to people. And actually talking with Chris and Francis last week made Carl and I think about how it would probably be good to speak to some of the folks who work in court services about PSI writing, right? Like the people who, another constituency that interacts with the guidelines in a different kind of way, but they really need to understand how the guidelines work, and they navigate through those complexities as well. So anything you can point us to would be really appreciated.
Yeah. There was a group that it finished 2 years ago. What was that group called? The Mark Bennett's group? They, yes.
Justice Reform Commission.
Yeah, that would be a good report for you guys to just get a hold of.
We had, if I recall, there were about 110 maybe recommendations that came out of that. I think we met 2 or 3 years. And then there were many of those sentencing ones were actually those that had been recommended by the commission and had been passed on to that particular commission. So
yeah, I remember that work. We did a lot of COVID era Zoom calls on that.
Yes, yes. Gonna let y'all know something, and I can't remember what it was now. During the legislative session, so that the committee is aware, during the legislative session, and since we were working on this and moving on to this point, I have already reached out to bids. They are excited about being involved in this process. I've checked with KCDA. They are more than happy to send prosecutors to Topeka to come in and discuss and provide input. And so we have a lot of the players that are very much willing to come to the table. And I think that is key in this situation to provide for buy-in, to be able to make sure that everybody is heard and that that we'll be able to have a richer, more robust discussion anyway, having everybody involved. And
the judges will have their meeting in October of this year, which would be a good time to get everybody, all of those individuals.
Actually, I think everyone comes together at the same time in different places. Think you guys don't do a fall conference?
No,
Oh,
ours is in the spring. No, it's really annoying.
think of the judges get together and the prosecutors get together at the same time, which might be a good time to schedule Carl in the state, and then maybe we could still pull together the defense bar.
And we already have judicial conference folks here in this room that are actually presenting. So, there may be some opportunity there.
I noticed in looking at the Minnesota materials, it looked like the judges in Minnesota kind of took themselves off to the side and did a separate survey for what are things that work in the guidelines and things that don't work. I think that Minnesota judges are particularly prickly particularly at the highest level, and that's probably the explanation for how they handled it separately. Ben, I get the impression from you that we don't have to deal with that quite a level of sensitivity about interacting with your judges.
No, I don't think so. And I could be wrong because I can't speak for the appellate judges, and I know that firsthand. I get my grade card every Friday.
They grade your papers.
I don't think so. I think there's they're all very easily approached, both the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, by and large, very humble people. So I don't think so. I think they would, and of course they would have to answer that question, but I think you reach out to OJA, and I think I would hope that they would want to work, because benefits Kansas, who we work
Yeah.
for.
That's great. Who is your state court administrator now? The person at the head of OJA?
Stephanie Smith,
It is, okay, thank you.
I have to thank because that organization has grown from about 10 people to its own private little island.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, my goodness. It used to be where I would know everybody when Marshall Crowther back in the day. And now there is pages of phone numbers on who to call. It
Oh,
is
wow.
really a bureaucracy at work.
Huh.
Don't quote me on any of that.
But I said was there was a place to cut. I'm kidding.
We're always interested in hearing.
I would want to hear from the district court judges though, because not that the appellate courts aren't good at what they do, but the district court criminal judges are the ones that see firsthand how the sentencing guidelines play out in their courtrooms every single day. The appellate courts interpret some of these special rules and conviction issues, but the day-to-day operations of the district court criminal judges.
And they'll be vocal.
I also just think they have very different perspectives.
Mhm.
Like the appellate court judges are very focused on interpreting the law and not like what is the justice of what happened in the courtroom.
Right.
And they aren't seeing all of those things firsthand on a day-to-day basis. So I agree. I think the district court judges is incredibly important. Not that we should ignore our appellate court judges, but they have a very different perspective.
Carl and Ellen, do you have any questions regarding the convenings and what may or may not be advantageous? I know that we've talked briefly about timing and, should we have these after hours, over lunch, during, we had talked about potentially, I think, Carl, you said 2 or 3 hours perhaps for these convenings. What are your thoughts, or what, maybe this group has more of an idea of what availability of each of those stakeholders?
I've grown to love meetings at noon. I'm available. Everybody breaks at noon, whether it be a jury or whatnot. And it works in very well with schedules.
Sometimes it feels more relaxed too. It just feels like that's the time and you can kind of step back from the grind.
Is it better to have them later in the week? Because you don't have to worry about jury trials.
For practitioners,
Sure.
yeah.
Is that so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, unless of course, you're doing a week-long trial or something? I think, it's going to be key to, we obviously want to be able to include as many people as we possibly can, and scheduling them on days that are not going to be, or times that aren't advantageous is not going to help us.
Yeah.
So I don't know what would be out and what would be okay, but if you're saying noon, perhaps later.
I think you're going to capture more people at noon.
Are you doing these in person or virtual?
Both.
Combination.
I think the biggest thing for me is always how much notice. Because it's fine if I can block off my calendar, but if I'm trying to squeeze it in when I've already got hearings and trials and things set, it's just harder.
How far ahead? Several months.
A couple of months is probably,
Right.
not that it's impossible otherwise, but the more time, the better. Like, I would rather block time off and cancel it if need be. Like, if we know we're gonna meet in September and then start meeting after that, if we figured out when we potentially would meet, I would just block them off now so they don't get switched over.
Yeah.
And then, delete them if I don't need it, but.
Yeah.
I also think.
Scott,
Oh, sorry, Ellen.
I was just going to say to your question, Scott, about length of time, that to me really boils down to how many folks are in the room and how talkative we anticipate them being. Because the goal of the convenings will be to get more information than we deliver. And if it feels like by numbers or just by comfort with being real open and honest, like you all are being today, then I think more time is ideal just to get more of that. But if it's something where either the number is a little small or, however you could anticipate that people might be a little bit more closed off, an hour is plenty of time to ask a good number of questions and not make people feel like they're just twiddling their thumbs. But if it's a talkative group, or people feel like it's a topic that they've got a lot to say about it, yeah, if we can get a couple hours in busy calendars, then I think that's a great amount of time.
I also think it matters, and I know I threw this out there, but we have a lot of counties that have one prosecutor, not even any defense attorneys in some counties, right? And so when you're trying to get as many voices at once, whether you do it in Topeka or Wichita, there's probably half the state that cannot come. So that's why I mentioned the virtual option, because we know the rural justice, there is a problem in rural justice and defense attorneys and prosecutors and in most of our non-major cities, which is Wichita and Topeka, Johnson County. So focusing on a time when they actually have set aside, like KCDA's conference, like the judges conference, to have a facilitator there and to spend that time during those conferences doing that, and then having the defense part put together an intentional time period where people can block off their calendars and be able to participate in that when they're not being pulled to court, because the nice thing about that is the judges aren't having court during that time. So we have the time to be able to focus on something like that. I think being intentional with that, you'll get more reward than doing it at a different time where they're required to travel, leave courts, leave dockets. And I can't even find a date when there isn't a docket, on a judicial district. There's 31 judicial districts in 105 counties, and on every given day, somebody's doing something, so.
I think to that point, we've had luck recently, including in Kansas, with some remote engagements of folk. We on a separate project with the Department of Corrections, looking at community corrections districts and directors, by offering, it made practical sense for us, but it also ended up being something where people were we had several options for directors to join. We sort of made it available first by region, but if someone couldn't join their region, they could join another, and aimed for lunch hours and days of the week that to some degree felt consistently maybe lighter in schedules. And because they were also smaller groups, I think people felt more comfortable even with the inherent awkwardness of remote engagement, being really straightforward and honest about things. And Carl and I have done something like this with jail administrators in West Virginia recently. So I think that there's ways that we're learning how to do this to accommodate schedules and geography in that way too, and still have it feel like a good use of everyone's time. You usually don't need as much time as, in my experience, you do in person for those two, so they can be even quicker. They can be a lunch hour if people are willing to give that up for something like this.
And I appreciate you offering that, Ellen. I would say the feedback you're going to get from Sedgwick County will be drastically different than the feedback you're going to get from the rural counties. And so thinking about that as an intentional decision, because Sedgwick County practice is different than a lot of different places.
True on any. Any other discussion? So our next meeting date will be during the workshop in September, correct?
Yep.
All right.
We can organize that. And
Where's that?
that'll be here.
I think, are you talking about the Is it up
Here,
here?
it'll be in Topeka.
Yeah,
But
that's what I meant.
Yeah, okay, great.
In the DOCU conference room.
And do you have that date already?
We do.
Is that just going to be steering committee or is it gonna be like a presentation to the entire
I think I think it's
commission?
good to have the entire commission get on board with
Because
it.
that one is more of a
Yeah.
presentation to
Yeah.
us, right?
Right.
Carl, it's September 23rd.
Thank you.
And I think it'll be a good progress report type of situation too, so.
Well, I've never bothered ending a meeting early. So. Carl and Ellen, I really look forward. I think I speak for everybody here working with you. I think this is going to be fascinating. And it's kind of historic, talking 33 years and haven't really done much to this sins and guidelines. So Godspeed. Look forward to hearing from you, and we'll keep the lines of communication open here. And you need anything, let us know, and we'll make sure it happens.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you so much.
Anything further from anyone? All right, very good.
Thank you.
We'll be adjourned.
Thanks.
My daughter texted me that they're still
Yeah,
here.
great.
Like, 2 hours and started at 8 a.m. She's mad.
Yeah, I will. No, that's good. Because, I mean, we grew up with, you got the same church.
Yeah.
Drain,
Work town.
downstairs. Down steps or.
Oh, yeah. We got it out. We don't realize what a mess this is.
Good job.
So.
I mean, I will.
Here, so it's like.
Now, if you have sediment in it.
I've got a check. He was bragging.
Rosé.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
State attorney.
I know. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
And
Gone.
Very.
My youngest stayed at home.
They said we might separate.
Yeah, separate.
My youngest was her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm done. We are 6 months away from that. We have to work for it. They had that died. Because she did school, she does school golf.
Yes.
We're so bad. Finding the
Works.
You're in a.
Yeah.
Make it Thursday for that.
It is really hard.
Okay. No, there's a lot to be said for that.
Like, I have to go do a group project.
Not good.
Yeah, but then next.
See you too. Safe travel.
So.
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Appreciate it. You guys have been doing the heavy
They've
lifting.
been great to work with, and
Yeah, it's very helpful.
that's Carlos.
Okay, yeah, just let me know. I just phased it in.
Yeah.
What about?
Yeah, you have.
By the end of the year.
Point service.
So Peyton's not gonna do it, but she's gonna go over the case app.
I don't think.
Oh, good.
So I was gonna talk to her.